U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken in Israel is having a press conference. Let's take you there live.
Hamas and other terror groups. There will be no partners for peace if they're consumed by humanitarian catastrophe and alienated by any perceived indifference to their plight. This is what binds us as human beings. I've seen images too of Palestinian children, young boys and girls, pulled from the wreckage of buildings. When I see that, when I look into their eyes through the TV screen, I see my own children. How can we not? Hamas doesn't care 1 second or 1 iota for the welfare, for the well-being of the Palestinian people. It cynically and monstrously uses them as human shields, putting its commanders and command posts, its weapons and ammunition, within or beneath residential buildings, schools, mosques, hospitals. But civilians should not suffer the consequences for its inhumanity and its brutality. We've provided Israel advice that only the best of friends can offer on how to minimize civilian deaths while still achieving its objectives of finding and finishing Hamas terrorists and their infrastructure of violence. Today, I spoke with Prime Minister Netanyahu and other senior officials about concrete steps to do that. President Biden has consistently stressed the need for Israel to operate according to international humanitarian law. I also emphasized that the protection of civilians must take place not just in Gaza, but also in the West Bank, where incitement and extremist violence against Palestinians must be stopped and perpetrators held accountable. Third, we need to substantially and immediately increase the sustained flow of humanitarian assistance into Gaza and getting American citizens and other foreign nationals out of Gaza. Since we reached agreement with Israel, Egypt, and the United Nations 2 weeks ago on mechanisms to enable humanitarian aid to begin reaching civilians in need, we have scaled up deliveries. We've gone from 0 to now over 100 trucks going into Gaza through the Rafah crossing every day. But this is still not enough. I spoke to Israeli leaders about tangible steps that can be taken to increase the sustained delivery of food.
Okay, that was U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken speaking in Israel. We do know that he's in Israel and is expected to travel across the Middle East and then to the Far East later. Right now with us is Jessica Stone. She's live from the White House in Washington, D.C. Jessica, good to see you. Happy Friday. Congress is debating a $106 billion package, which includes aid for Palestinian civilians as well as aid for Israel as well. Not to mention that the House last night passed that standalone bill for Israel. Secretary Blinken pushes them to pass this package earlier this week in Congress, the bigger one. What are the numbers and how is Washington planning to get the aid to those in need?
So you heard Secretary Blinken in that press conference excerpt talk a little bit about the U.S. efforts to get aid to the Gazan people and the Gazan civilians in particular without having that aid fall into the hands of Hamas militants, which is a concern for the White House. But they're also up against a problem in Congress, which you alluded to, that $106 billion package has about $9 billion proposed by the White House for both Israel and Gaza in terms of aid. And it's been caught up in a fight over whether to separate the aid to Israel, which is what the House Republicans support and have actually voted to approve. But the Democrats in the Senate do not want that. They want the White House plan, as far as we know now. And so there's unlikely to be any passage of that aid package, at least this week alone. And the White House does not want the Israel aid parsed out from its package, which also includes border security, Ukraine funding, and some other things that they're interested in getting Republicans to approve. As you mentioned, or as Secretary Blinken alluded to, the U.S. has called for a pause to deliver that aid, not a ceasefire, but a pause in the fighting to make sure that that aid gets to the Gazan people. And already $100 million in humanitarian aid has been approved by the U.S. government to go to Gaza. This $9 billion is just the next iteration of that effort. Susan?
Yeah, and Secretary of State Antony Blinken, after his trip to the Middle East, he's going to head to Japan, South Korea, and India as well. What do we expect from his trip?
Yeah, he's got a packed schedule. Can you imagine? He's going to be in Jordan later today, and then he goes on to Tokyo over the weekend, Seoul, South Korea, and then New Delhi, India. He is going to be talking largely about all of the ways in which the U.S. wants to partner with the region in terms of Indo-Pacific security. In terms of his conversations with Korea, those will be focused on the new Russia DPRK or North Korea relationship, the implications for peninsula security. In India, Blinken will join Secretary Austin, the defense secretary, for a 2+2 ministerial, which is a deepening of the relationship between India and the United States when it comes to Indo-Pacific security. I should note that just this week we learned that Kurt Campbell, who has been an active Asia hand, an active proponent of working more closely with India, he is currently on the national security. He is the Indo-Pacific advisor to the president. He has been elevated. The White House has nominated him to become the Deputy Secretary of State, and that certainly indicates that we're going into a direction of more emphasis in terms of diplomacy on the U.S.-India, U.S.-Indo-Pacific relationship if he gets that nomination completed and confirmed by the U.S. Senate. Susan?
Wow, thank you for that nugget of information. Stay with me, Jessica, please.